All right, we are live. So my name is Lacey McCormick, and this is one of our videos as part of our initiative to help local conservation organizations generate local media coverage of what the Sackett decision, narrowing the scope of the Clean Water Act, will what it will do in each state, right? And I'm talking to Bill Cooksey, who's the National Wildlife Federation's, my title for him is Sportsman Outreach Guru. And Bill is not on our communications team, but I kind of feel like he should be because he's always doing a great job of getting media. And every time I talk to him, he's, doing some, local sports radio show, etc. So I thought he was the best person to really, and he is obviously himself a sportsman, to talk to, the National Wildlife Federation's affiliates and other state organizations about, why you should talk to outdoor media, hunting and fishing media, and then how you can talk to hunting and fishing in media. Do you want to jump in, Bill?
Well, sure. And I mean, I love talking about media because it has been a big part of my background. I was a marketing director at a company that made hunting products for 15 years. And then I was a magazine editor on a regional hunting and fishing magazine. So it's been a big part of my background. So it's fun to talk about media to me, and sporting media in particular. And how to communicate with them and what to communicate, especially on the post Sackett, is it can be convoluted and politicized in ways it shouldn't be.
That's right. And do you want to talk about that exactly? Like, what if you were going to communicate and try to get, try to do some media on this, how would you sum this up? Because it is you said it perfect. It's convoluted and it's been politicized.
Mm-hmm.
When I think at its core, it's actually pretty simple.
It is. And look, I'm in this job. The only reason I'm here today and working in conservation is ducks. I love ducks. I love duck hunting. And waterfowl, water is kind of a big deal. And I lost my train of thought for a moment. But anyway,
yeah, that happens.
So I'll begin with, like most sportsmen, or the majority of sportsmen, I'm a conservative Republican. I live in Tennessee, which is a very red state. So we're very conservative. And a lot of times people they think you have to believe a certain thing about a certain issue. And I refuse to be put in that box. Our water and our wetlands aren't a political issue. It's a necessary thing. And, a pretty famous Republican years ago said, your rights end where my nose begins. And water is a great place to talk about that, because when you move water around, it has to go somewhere, onto someone else. You trade one problem for another. And we've learned that everywhere I work, Mississippi River, Gulf Coast, Everglades, all of our problems are because we keep moving water. Obviously, we have to keep building out infrastructure. We have more people, we have more businesses, and no one's against that. But with Sackett, y'all talked about this, and that's not the point of this interview, but the federal protections are largely gone. So now it's up to the states. And in Tennessee, we have a pretty good waters of the state rule in Tennessee, but people are trying to push that back fast and hard. Wanting to develop a lot of wetlands. Fortunately, we also have a lot of conservative sportsmen in Tennessee who have been beating the drum. They beat it back in the last legislative session. So sportsmen can have that impact, and hopefully they will in other states. Without those wetlands, we don't have waterfowl. And we know that from the prairie pothole region, where our ducks are produced, all the way down to the Gulf Coast. And here in Tennessee, it's our river bottoms, our swamps, our lakes, and in the wintertime, even our flooded ag fields. And a lot of those are small wetlands and isolated wetlands that make the difference. And these are the ones we're all worried about.
Right.
So we have to carry that message forward. And some of my friends on the conservative side early on would say, hey, man, I don't want the feds telling me what to do. I don't either. So let's not even worry about them. Let's get it right within our own states. And I'm not willing to give or concede conservation of our wetlands and our waters to either party. We all own this, and it's our responsibility to take care of this stuff. And I don't care how you vote, it's your responsibility to care about it and try to take it forward as best we can into the future.
And that kind of mirrors, there's another presentation on sort of like messaging recommendations, and future generations is one that's shown up again and again when you want to talk about conservation. That's one of the most compelling messages. This one hits two of the most compelling messages, which is way of life and also future generations, right? So
Yep.
those are just some messaging tips. But let's also talk a little bit about fishing, because we know that over time, and again, this is sort of death by a thousand cuts. The SACA decision was in May of 23. We're not really able to point at disasters on the ground now caused by the SACA decision. It's death by a thousand cuts. It's going to take time before these impacts, before these negative impacts really show up. But let's talk about fishing and how it can affect fishing as well.
Well, sure. Like I said earlier, water always goes somewhere. So if you drain and tile a small wetland, that water is going somewhere. I mean, we can see it at Devil's Lake in North Dakota. That's a great example. Here in Tennessee, we have a ton of small creeks and rivers. My understanding, we're the most biodiverse inland state in our rivers. So the number of species is amazing. And when you start pushing water out of these small wetlands and into the smaller creeks and eventually into the bigger rivers and reservoirs, but those will be, the last impacted. And, but we don't want to see our small rivers further hampered. And that's happening all the time. We aren't putting less stress on our waterways. It's more every day, even when we're trying to take care of them. So, the first things you see are more muddy water where it should be clean water. And that's especially true in Middle and East Tennessee and our trout waters and some of those places. It can only take so much. I mean, I like to look at it. God was really good at this. When he built all this that we inherited, it all worked really, really well. And the further we get away, and if you want to call it nature, that's fine too. I go the other way. God was really good at it. And when the farther we get away from how it was designed to begin with, the more trouble we seem to have.
I think that's great. And I think that you're just kind of, just listening to you talk is kind of the language that you should be using and at the level. The way that we've been talking about this for far too long is flooded wetlands and ephemeral streams and swank decision and Orpanos and, all of these sort of terminology that take it away from what it really is and why it is that we care about these things. And I think that if you're talking to hunters and anglers, you really need to just be leading with the impacts and the,
right
on the resource and on the resources and on their way of life, right? On fishing, on hunting, particularly, I think that the most immediate impacts are going to be waterfowling, and then also sort of for your trout fishermen, your skinny water fishermen, your salmon fishermen, and then it's going to go from there, assuming that nothing happens and we aren't able to get protections where we need them.
Right. And look, the best government is typically local because you can have the most impact. So I do like this opportunity states have to try to get things right in their state. I can reach out and I can call my local representatives and they'll talk to me and they'll know how I feel about it. But we can also do the same thing with media.
Right.
And that's something you and I have talked a lot about. Your local radio shows, especially local newspapers, if you have a regional or state magazine that is devoted to hunting and fishing, they're constantly looking for stories. So there's no reason to not reach out to them. They want to hear from people in their area. They want to hear from people with different views. Because I promise you, when I was a magazine editor, you're just always looking for more stories and more people to talk to. That's the hardest part of those jobs. So I would encourage anyone in their state to really look, see who's doing radio shows, see who's doing local television shows or local, newspapers and magazines, and talk to them, reach out to them. They will be glad to hear from you. And sportsmen can talk about this in a way that isn't anti-business, because that's not what it should be. I mean, I'm very pro-business, but it has to be done right. Growth has to be handled correctly. We all know, as a duck hunter, I can point to a lot of places really shouldn't be farmed right now. And we all know it. Even the farmer will tell you that. But things have been done, different policies and insurance practices, many from the federal government, encourage them to farm those properties, and they might get a crop 3 out of 5 years, and the rest of the time it's wet and flooded and nasty, and could be good for ducks, but that ought to be a wetland, really. The farmer knows it and will tell you that.
Yeah, but that's their land, so they can't go get out the land, right? Yeah, so we have,
and they're there to make a living.
Set up. Yeah,
you know, we understand developers make money developing, farmers make money planting crops. You know, I get it, but we can all do better. We can all do better.
If you wanted to get on a radio show in your state, you know, if you knew that, I mean, a lot of these states, it's in, you know, my years, I can see that there's a lot of statewide radio shows, statewide hunting and fishing radio shows that, you know, mostly air on AM, but I think they get a lot of listeners, and I think that they have pretty devoted listeners, so that people, you know, start and stay on, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to reach out, if you've never done it before, but you are, you know, let's say that, you know, you have this background, obviously you don't necessarily want, well, I know, I take that back. I was about to say that you really need to have a hunter and angler, but I've actually had people, you know, who run these state fishing shows reach out to me and call me, and they're happy to have a policy person as long as they're willing to talk about it from this angle, like from the, you know, what it's going to mean for sportsmen.
Yes.
So if you wanted to get on one of those shows, how would you do
that? Let's just assume you know the show you want to get on. You want to be on LR Outdoors on ESPN out of Memphis. I'm going to go to their website. I'm going to Google it, find that host via Google, which won't be hard to do.
Right.
And I would probably start with an email.
Yeah.
And depending on what they have listed, but I'm going to follow quick with a phone call if there's a phone listed. I mean, obviously that varies by show, but they want to hear from you. Yeah. And you'll be able to reach them, but reach out to them and say, hey man, whether you're a policy person or a duck hunter, you know, hey, this is Bill Cooksey. I'm a duck hunter here in West Tennessee, and I'm really worried about our wetlands and what I'm hearing may happen in the near future. I'd love to get on and talk to you about it sometime.
Right. And it sounds to me that you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know exactly how many wetlands. You don't need to know which ones. You know, you might be able to point to a general area and say, you know, in this area, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, you don't necessarily need to have all the answers, and you don't necessarily, it feels to me, need to have solutions. You just need to be able to talk to someone about what they might be, or what they could look like, or what the impacts could be, and what the solutions could be,
or why it ought to matter, why you're concerned about something and why it should matter to a lot of people. If I had to be an expert on everything I talk about, a true expert with all the answers, I couldn't do an interview on anything. No one is that person. So don't worry, just don't get too far over your skis. Talk to them, tell them why it matters to you and what you're concerned about. If you know more, great. If you don't, you can kind of leave it at that. You know, tell them who you are, what you like to do, where you're from, and what you're worried about, and get that conversation started. Usually they'll want to talk to you off the air first, so you can get comfortable with them. If you haven't done a lot of that sort of thing, and so let's talk to you off the air, and then maybe we can do something.
And I will say that from my limited experience with this is that if you can be useful to them on one thing, then they'll call you again. Right. So this is really, if you're looking to raise your profile with, you know, with hunters and anglers, because maybe that's not who's necessarily a key part of your constituency, so that they, you know, they'll have a more sense of you. But if you can go on the air and not like stumble over your words more than like anyone's going to stumble over their words when they're live.
Sure.
And it is scary a little bit, I think.
It is.
But if you know,
but remember, a lot of these shows aren't even taped live. They aren't even live.
Right.
They tape them and pretend they're live. And
But yeah, that makes sense. They can
yeah,
edit out just like weird stuff that
right.
sounds
I
bad.
mean, obviously they prefer not to, but that's okay. And you're
Yeah,
not going to be perfect. Like you said, you won't be perfect. That's impossible. Um, and have a good time with it. Relax, have a good time,
yeah,
and they will keep coming back to you. I mean, it's amazing the people who now either come back to me to get me to interview for something, or they'll come to me and say, "Who do you know who could talk about this?" I
yeah,
mean,
that's
when you
absolutely right.
become the source, you aren't just your own, you aren't just telling your own story. You become a source they look to. Who else knows about this? And you can be a hero
Yeah.
to that media person.
And I will say, I think too, especially radio, they've got a long time. They've got these hour-long slots or these podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of radio shows now are also podcasts, right? Then they
Yes.
record them and they release them. So then
Mm-hmm.
they can live for a long time, and
Right.
you'll get sort of a little long tail of streams for a while.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's interesting to me how resilient radio has been in this era of media consolidation.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
so let's talk a little bit about type of media that hasn't been quite as resilient, and that's sort of the state-focused hunting and fishing, like magazines and newspapers. If
Yeah.
I mean,
Sadly, they've been going away. I mean, so
yeah,
many of the newspapers 20 years ago, when I was a marketing director, if I needed something out fast, I called all the outdoor writers at the various newspapers in states we wanted to hit.
right,
Okay. And you had a story out that Sunday.
yeah,
And most of those writers are gone. So it has become more difficult. But there are places that still have a good outdoor presence, or they may do it online only.
hmm,
Um,
yeah,
and you just have to keep your eyes open for those opportunities. And there's nothing wrong with calling, sending a email to the editor and saying, "Hey, do y'all do
right,
any outdoor coverage? Is there any opportunity?"
hmm,
Um, you know, that works as well. The outdoor magazines, a lot of those have gone online only, so you have to get on the
yeah,
computer and search them out. But they're still read. And then
yeah.
obviously there are
There,
bloggers, there are podcasts, and all of that. But yeah, the
it's
the local stuff has gotten tougher.
yeah, and it seems to me almost gut check this for me if this is right, that you almost would like want to find. So it's rather than you contact the radio station, you're going to contact the host of the radio show. And I feel like
Hmm.
that there are still columnists who could be interested in it. But then the challenge is how do you find them, right? Because their email address isn't necessarily, they don't necessarily want to get. But I do find that a lot of these hunting and fishing magazines are so product oriented, that
They are.
having a discussion around policy is a little bit more challenging.
It can be. You have to find the right writers, but they're out there,
They
especially
are.
some of the more prolific freelance people who write
Mhm.
for a lot of magazines. I mean, if you see an article, you like it, and it's like, this is the sort of thing I think we need more of, find that guy's name. I can guarantee you can go on Google, find him, and get straight to his email. I promise you, because he wants to be found. He wants
Mhm.
magazines to find him. He wants anyone he can write something for to find him. Therefore, he also is out there for you to find.
Right. Now, do you think that these columnists, so a lot of times if I'm telling people to pitch regular news media, right, I'll tell them that they need to have, or that it's kind of beneficial if you can pitch a story with two voices, not just yours, your organization, your conservation organization, but then someone else who can provide a different perspective. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can offer them, because they're going to need an opposing or alternate perspective, if you can provide that alternate perspective, then that just makes their job a little bit easier. And then you also make sure that you can provide an alternate perspective that's not going to be opposing necessarily. It's more a different perspective, but
A different
still
perspective, but not necessarily just
not
busting
like
company
they're
heads.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Those
yeah,
wetlands don't need protecting. Can't wait till we develop them.
right.
That's not
Yeah,
the
I
alternate
mean,
perspective
the
you want.
less investigating, the less digging the writer or show host has to do, the better
Yeah.
for them. Because look, it is a competitive market out there, and like all of us, they're looking at their time and how much time it takes to come out with a show or to come up with an article, and they make X amount of dollars on that. So they only have so much time to dedicate to it. So the more you can do for them, the better. And you end up, like you said, with a better product, because you can be, even if you aren't telling them the same thing, you're not at odds, you're somewhat complementary.
Right.
You know, it's perfectly
That's the
possible to
idea.
have a good farmer and me talk about some of this stuff, and we're really not going to be far apart.
So final thought from me is, typically in the conservation world, we do a lot of press releases, kind of like formal documents, statements, press releases. What I'm hearing from you is that it's more of an informal outreach. You're trying to develop relationships. You're sending them an email. You're calling them on the phone. They don't really necessarily want a press release from you. That's not really totally useful when you're trying to reach this type of media market.
Absolutely. And for me personally, I know I'm going to do a better job if I feel like I've established a relationship with someone, even if it's just a little bitty one, and we've traded a couple of pictures of, our latest fishing trip and one conversation, and now we get on the radio together. We have a connection, and
right.
I do better when I have a connection.
And I think that's true for a lot of media. I would actually tell folks, general tip, create relationships rather than put out press releases. But
you have to put out press releases. Yeah,
we have to put out press releases. But for this world, I think it's really all about relationships.
It is, because it is a small world. I mean, there are a lot of hunters and fishermen out there, but it's still, when you get down to it, it's amazing how small the media in the outdoor industry is.
That's right. And I think that they want to, if you put out a press release, they don't know who it's for, but I think they want to know that you want to engage with them, especially if Hunters and Anglers is not in the name of your organization. They really want to know, do you have any connection to this world at all, or you're just open to it? Even if you're not a hunter and angler, that's fine. But if you're open to this world and you're wanting to engage with these folks, then they're not going to necessarily know that if you just send them a press release about sacking.
That's right. And I would say we sportsmen are getting, hopefully, more and more cognizant of the fact, a lot of people didn't grow up with this. So when an organization or a person who doesn't hunt or fish, but has an understanding of it or an appreciation for it, and understands we can do a lot of things together, on the landscape, and we all benefit, that's good for hunters and anglers,
right.
to have someone who isn't a hunter or angler in our camp, so to speak.
Right. And I think that they often feel that there's a lot of people who are not in their camp and who are against them. And
Yes.
I think that this, obviously, if you're not watching this video, if that's you, right? You didn't make it this far. So, yeah. But my point is that you could be not necessarily a hunting fishing group, but if you're willing to talk to them and you're not an anti, right? That's what you guys call them. You're not an anti.
You're not an anti, then we can probably work together.
All right. Well, that's good. I think this sounds like a good note to end this on.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Lacey.